Well, good afternoon, everyone. And sorry we're starting a couple minutes late. I had to go up and vote. Let me start out by saying it is not boring. It is frightening at times up here on the Hill in terms of the massive amount of change and so many things that are happening, I think, that are going in the wrong direction. But let me go through 4 or 5 items and then be happy to take your questions. First, on a bit of good news, we finally got the disaster declaration for Southwest Virginia for the February storms. Senator Kaine and Morgan Griffith and I have been working on this for some time. I know the governor's been working as well, and it was pretty disturbing that it took this long to get the declaration, since a number of adjacent states had gotten theirs much earlier from this same group of storms. So we've got the public disaster declaration. We're now trying to get the individual disaster declaration. I know from conversations with folks in some of these counties, the flooding was at literally in 1977 kind of levels in places like Grundy. So this is relief, again, that's long overdue. And to those communities, remember, this is not charity. This is your right as an American to get this assistance from FEMA. So we're going to stay on top of that on a going forward basis. On a less optimistic note, I am outraged that the continual dismissal and mistreatment and, frankly, ignorance around how this administration is dealing with national security. We saw in the last 10 days the firing of the NSA Cyber Command, Tim Hawk, a general with 30 years experience, extraordinarily qualified. Ms. Noble, who was the senior ranking member. Then we saw the American NATO general fired as well. She happened to be a woman, which seems to be a disproportionate number of firings in the military. And this is coming because it appears that this literal crazy conspiracy theorist, Laura Loomer, who most White Houses would not let within 100 yards of the White House, is actually going in and giving personnel advice to the president, and he's taking it. You take that kind of disruption of our security leadership at the same time that it appears there's going to be up to 1,200 firings, rifts, buyouts at the CIA. And reminding folks that we finally got the numbers. It's about $380,000 to get the security clearance and training of a CIA officer. So randomly firing the new people does not make our country safer. So you've got these actions taking place where we still have not also held anyone responsible for the Signalgate fiasco, where classified information was put out under this non-classified channel, and we still don't even have any indication. We understand there were 20 other signal chats. We have no indication what other subjects were discussed. And what that does to the morale of the military and the IC, because they know if it had been a military officer or a CIA officer who treated this classified information so sloppily, they'd be fired. It also means that we are seriously deteriorating even further our alliances. We are hearing on a regular basis that our 50-year, 70-year allies are not sure they can share classified information with us because they're not sure that it'll be kept secret. And that hurts the safety of Americans. I know when I was down in Virginia Beach and Chesapeake a couple weeks ago for town halls, I mean, many of those individuals knew people who were deployed on the Truman, which is the carrier that out of Norfolk where these strikes had been launched, and they knew that if that information had got out, their loved ones could have been literally in harm's way. The Houthis could have taken down some of our aircraft. And the fact that there's no accountability, again, speaks volume. That coming on top of these political firings of senior leadership, if it doesn't scare the heck out of you, it should. On another matter, more related back to Southwest Virginia, we've seen a series of firings at the organization that takes care of the health care of our miners. So folks that go out and discover whether a miner's got black lung, get them to some kind of medical treatment, or actually, if they're still working, move them from to a more secure spot in a mining operation so their exposure can be cut down. That whole division just got fired. And so you have the hypocrisy of Trump saying, on one hand, he wants to help revive coal, but on the other hand, literally taking away health care protections and safety of the miners who work in underground. And you can't have it both ways. You just can't have it both ways. And unfortunately, that is what he seems to be trying to do when you put miner safety at risk. On a similar note, I should just mention I saw a couple of folks from the FDA yesterday, mid-career employees who were fired. They worked at a program on children's cessation of smoking. They get no government money because it's paid for by user fees. And their activities have saved about $38 billion in healthcare costs, because if you stop kids from smoking, adults should have the right, but stop kids from smoking. And again, let go with no notice, and they're trying to figure out how they can pay for child care and find a job at the same time. On another back to national security issue, as you all know, you've heard me talk for years about the propaganda threat that TikTok can present. And now that we're in a full-fledged trade war with China, the ability for the Chinese government to slightly shift that algorithm to put out anti-U.S. and pro-China propaganda on TikTok was the reason why 80% of us, Democrats and Republicans alike, voted to not ban TikTok, but to say we got to make sure the Communist Party of China doesn't control this application. Well, the president disobeyed the law when he first said we're going to give a 75-day extension. I didn't raise too much concern then, because if there was a deal that was coming about, then give a little grace period. But now, without any indication of the status, for him to extend this another 75 days, way beyond the intent of Congress, it'll be, I've been, again, so disappointed that Republicans who say the president's got to follow the law have kept quiet. And I can just tell you, if there is a deal that is announced at any point where suddenly you've got American company X or Y and there's supposedly new safety, just look at the bottom line. If the algorithm remains in Beijing, the whole deal structure is a sham. And that's what Congress knew. That's why we passed this legislation. Ironically, again, President Trump was the first person to raise this issue to attention back in 2019. He's obviously flipped his position. But we're going to see whether this president will, again, ignore the law and put his own interest ahead of national security interests. And I'm sure you'll ask questions on this, but the economic harm that's being done by this global tariff war, we're just starting to feel it. And selected tariffs against China, absolutely, but that ought to be done in consort with our friends and allies around the world. But the problem is, we are so losing friends and allies around the world when we're not a reliable defense partner, when we're not a reliable intelligence partner. And now we are whacking countries, friend and foe alike. I got pretty upset yesterday at the Finance Committee meeting where Australia, where we have a free trade agreement, and we actually have a surplus, they buy more stuff than we sell them, they got whacked as well on a tariff. And this, what this is doing to our relationships, what it'll translate into, not just people's lower stocks prices and their 401ks, but you'll soon start to see this reflected in price increases. I think virtually every economist thinks we're headed to a recession. And the notion that Donald Trump, because he's believed in tariffs for 40 years, can unwind a global economy without huge costs. And there are ways that we can help more American manufacturing and bring more jobs back. But it ought to be done in concert with our friends and allies, not by, in effect, declaring war on the world. And what we have done in a week of this activity is, I've been part of an effort for years that have tried to encourage our friends, not to buy Huawei equipment, to be careful of dealing with China. All of those concerns have been washed out with this trade war. So we've got companies or countries like Japan and South Korea who, understandably are saying, well, if we can't count on America, we got to do more trade with China. That is not in our country's interest, and that will also mean many of our European allies are walking away from us. The whole kind of global South is wide open because China looks very good compared to an America that doesn't keep its word, whether it's on things like USAID or now on trade matters. And this will be felt by Virginians in their pocketbook. It'll be felt in their retirement accounts going down. It'll be felt with as a number of deals that we're going to bring jobs here to America will crater. And again, when will my Republican friends find their voice? I mean, I'm kind of tired of people coming up to me and saying, Mark, stay on this national security stuff. I'm glad you're speaking up. Well, if they don't join and move from private concerns to public concerns, then we are in for a heap of trouble. I've gone on a little long, but why don't I turn it back over to Laura at this point, and happy to take your questions.
Senator, our first question is Mitchell Miller with WTOP.
Hi, Senator. Thank you very much for joining us, as always. On the trade war question specifically related to China and Asia, beyond the tariffs, experts expect China to take other actions linked to so-called economic warfare, like controlling U.S. companies' access to materials to make computer chips, defense products. What are your concerns related to this, in addition to the broader implications of tariffs for national security?
Well, we've already seen China put restraints on some of the rare earth minerals. We've been saying for years that China not only controlling the source of rare earth minerals, but the processing would come back and bite us. And now stopping the flow of those rare earth minerals really does a big hit to our technology industry, whether it's phones, whether it is the ability to create semiconductor chips. This kind of bifurcated approach again on Taiwan, whether again we like it or not, Taiwan still makes most of the cutting edge chips. If they are not trading back to us, or Taiwan moves back to say, well, we can't count on America, we're going to realign with mainland China, that will undermine our ability, for our advanced warfighting machines, for us in the AI battle, to be ahead. So this economic strategy, where they will declare economic war on us, has huge ramifications. And there are a number of areas where, again, having a long-term strategy to move manufacturing back, absolutely. Biden tried to start that with things like the CHIPS bill and the infrastructure bill. But to do that in an effective way, you needed to do it with friends and allies. Now we are looking like an unreliable partner in national security. We're looking like an unreliable trading partner. And with the kind of arrogance towards, again, our allies, you could change these tariffs tomorrow, and it's going to be a hell of a long time before Canadians start buying American booze again, because they feel, rightfully so offended that we've somehow turned Canada into an enemy. And I would point out that the one country that didn't get tariffs is Russia. Explain that to me. We don't do much trade with Russia anymore, but I just think that these are not partisan issues. This is so undermining America's security, and I don't have a lot of hope that the administration is going to recognize this. But goodness, we only need 4 or 5 folks in the Senate, 4 or 5 folks in the House to say, no more of this. We are hurting our country. But my colleagues have got to find their voice publicly, not just privately.
Senator, our next question is Tyler Englander with WRIC.
Hey, morning, Senator. Thanks for doing this. In Richmond today, some TSA workers are holding a rally to protest the DHS's decision to end collective bargaining for TSA workers. Just your take on ending collective bargaining for them and whether that could affect the number of TSA officers who are at airports and therefore safety for American travelers.
And one of the hallmarks of an American economy since literally the 1930s is that workers ought to have a right to organize. And through organizing, to negotiate for pay and benefits. That system has had bumps, but it works. And the idea that this administration is going to come in without any reason and throw that agreement out, I understand why TSA workers are angry, and they got a right to be. And what this will mean, if we don't have TSA workers, or they do a sick out, or we end up with air traffic controllers that are suddenly saying, well, this is not worth the stress, then, Americans' safety in the skies could be implemented. We've got the safest airspace in the world, but it wouldn't take many more accidents, or it wouldn't take if we suddenly have a opting out of TSA workers and we can't fill the ranks because their agreements are undermined, or we have, particularly, we're behind 3,000 already on air traffic controllers. If they get hit again, you could see a dramatic downturn in American public flying. That again would have a huge economic hit. We've already seen, I just point out, travel from Canada to the U.S. on airlines is down 75% based on this crazy trade war. We end up with TSA or air traffic controllers getting so abused, or agreements being so ignored. You'll see this as well in terms of downturns in American air traffic. Again, another unnecessary hit to the economy.
Senator, our next question is Janara Busi, 13 News Now.
Good morning, Senator. A little off topic, but I wanted to ask about the Navy's new announcement that sailors who left the service over refusing to get the COVID vaccine can be reinstated, but with no back pay. Right now, we need, to enhance the armed forces in all aspects, and we know that COVID does still exist. Is there any concern about bringing back maybe a substantial amount of unvaccinated sailors into the force?
Well, again, we saw during COVID deaths on ships that have been deployed. I mean, you think about what is a better breeding ground, not just for COVID, but for any kind of airborne disease. A ship would be that is a perfect petri dish. So I understand the controversy. We probably kept the COVID restrictions in place too long, but this, message it sends, it would, be great to have sailors back in line, and hopefully with some validation that they are not currently sick. But what it also sends is a message to sailors that you can disobey your superiors and not have consequences. So we need more sailors. We need to do a better job of recruitment. But boy, oh boy, when you see the kind of cuts taking place across the DoD as well, based on arbitrary numbers, it's hard to figure out how you would encourage somebody to join the services at this point, particularly when you've got a president that has gone against 40 years and suddenly says, Russia's a friend and Britain and Canada are not friends. That is totally counter to American military policy, literally for 70 years.
Senator, our next question is Bridget Kelly with WSET.
Hi, how are you? All right. Sorry. Okay, so the Department of Energy promised to give Microforest a $100 million grant to build a plant in Pennsylvania County. You said this project could fall apart without this grant. Why do you think that, and why do you think they are withholding the grant funding?
Well, I think they're withholding the grant funding, and I talked to the Secretary of Energy this week on this matter to see if we could get those funds released. They're holding it, and there's about 300 projects across the country being put on hold. just because they were frankly done in the last administration. And what that does is it sends a real chilling message to any company that is trying to get economic help to open a new business. I mean, Virginia has helped. This is the Berry Farm site in Pittsylvania County. We've been working on this site for over a decade. Almost, it goes back to the year, 2010, and and this was going to be the gem. 2,000 jobs. You take away $100 million, and that plant very well may not be built, or the Volvo expansion in Pulaski, or the Roanoke Cement Company outside of Roanoke. It's just a sign of bad faith. And what you've got is that they've screwed this up so much that even if they release the money, usually the federal financing is a small piece of an overall financing. It helps bridge the gap. But the most part, the company has to go out and get private financing to build this plant that I think was going to employ 2,000 people, and I think had a price tag of a couple $2 billion. Well, I can assure you that if you take when we got the award last year and looked at the financing opportunities then versus the chaos we've got now with the tariff agreement, I fear in a way that even if the federal money comes through, can the financing package be put back together? Because you're going to see inflation go up from these tariffs. That will drive interest rates up, and that will mean drive up the cost of this facility. It's Econ 101. And the fact that this is kind of being ignored, and it's not just the Berry Farm site, but it is, it's unfortunately, we've got about a half dozen of these projects around Virginia. And, I got assurances from the Secretary of Energy that this will get resolved shortly. I'm going to stay on it. I know the governor's going to stay on it. We've got to get these dollars released because, again, the local community is literally invested millions in getting these sites ready. To have the rug jerked out from under them is wrong, it's unfair, and it's frankly disrespectful to a community that voted with over 70% for Donald Trump.
Senator, our next question is Leah Tuckwiller with WSLS.
Hello, thank you for your time today, Senator. You recently joined in on a letter to the USDA about funding cuts for food banks and other emergency food providers. Did you get any answers to that letter? And what are the impacts these cuts could have or will have on the Commonwealth?
Well, I don't believe we've gotten any response. But this is, again, short-sighted cuts. Because in economic challenges, more people turn to the food banks. And we are seeing food banks have shortages already around the Commonwealth. I know how important food banks are, what a great job they did, for example, during COVID with families. And the minimal amount of money that they get from the feds goes a long way on buying surplus food that can help people get through a pinch. But remember, you're going to have the food banks double whammy. You'll have this federal funds cut, which is, I think, just cruel. And then you're going to have rising food costs because of these tariffs. And that will mean the food bank's ability, because they raise money from the community and others, to go out and buy food, their dollars won't go as far because, the cost of the food coming in from a Mexico or from a Canada or from abroad is going to go up. So, we've had parts of Virginia where up to a third of the population has had to access a food bank over the last couple of years, to undercut that part of the safety net now. Other than cruel and mean-spirited, I don't see any reasoning behind this. And again, the arrogance of the Agriculture Department not even to respond is telling in itself.
Senator, our next question is Bill Wyatt with the Martinsville Bulletin.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the microporous update, and you've already addressed that. So thank you, Senator Warner. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Bill. I guess, again, you guys know in Southside, we've whether it's in Martinsville or in Danville, South Boston, we've really made some great progress. But this, mega site in Pittsylvania County was going to be helpful not just to Danville and Pennsylvania, but it was going to be helpful all across Southside. And we worked for ages on this. And I just ask folks in the community to remember, they may not have liked the last administration, but they did try to honor their commitments. And, we went through a rigorous review process to get these funds. And the fact that they're now held up for appears to be political arbitrary reasons is beyond disappointing.
Senator, our final question is Sarah Allen with CBS 19.
Hi, Senator. Thanks for your time today. I am about to speak with a bunch of college students at UVA attending a career fair, and just kind of our general consensus is a lot of kids getting ready to graduate from college or searching for jobs are feeling nervous about the economy and about the options they'll have. What is your message about the current situation regarding the job market for these students?
Yeah, fair. Great. Boy, oh boy, great question. And I gotta get out of my, I want to encourage these folks coming out. You come out with a UVA degree, you're going to get a job, but the ability of how quick and how much is going to get, you'll be paid with this economic uncertainty is going to be a challenge. I can't, I'd love to find a way to make it less, more sugar-coated, but it's just, this is so unprecedented. And, the long haul, or even, I think, hopefully enough Republicans will be able to talk to Mr. Trump and say, let's roll these back. Some of these tariffs, particularly against our friends, where we actually have a trade surplus like Australia. But this uncertainty is going to make it really tough for folks that graduate in May, because I think everything is kind of in a frozen status for a while. And things will get better. It's never a good idea to bet against the American economy. We still are the leaders in innovation. In areas like AI, quantum computing, I think bio and combined with AI offers huge opportunities going forward as domains that I think we should invest in. And in the Charlottesville area, or actually out in Albemarle, there's ability to have a major new national security hub already at Ravenna Station, but there can be some, I think, huge additions. So there will be jobs coming through. But the timing of coming out in May with a degree with this kind of economic chaos, you'll get a job, but it may take a little bit. It may take a little bit longer. And again, that's no fault of the students. I can imagine how hard they've worked. And I think about, as I got out of college and I had all these student loans, they're going to come due. So I hope, again, that is one more factor that we can try to get back to some level of normalcy. And you want to take on China, absolutely count me in. But this kind of full economic war against all countries and tariff structure is not helping this economy.
Senator, that was our final question.
Well, thanks, everybody. I'll try to be a little more upbeat, but this is a pretty rocketing week or last couple of weeks. And I just want to, again, add, a lot of us are focused on the economy at this point, but this quiet undermining of our intelligence services and our national security relationships is doing long-term damage that can't be put back in the bottle once trust is broken. Thanks, everybody.